right, let's go ahead and get started with this second session. We are so thrilled to welcome you all to the second part of this webinar, Breathing for Justice. In this session, we'll be talking about long COVID, higher education, the archive, chronic illness, and so much more. My name is Sarah, and I'm a Korean American person with shoulder-length black hair that is curled. I have on pink glasses, and I am wearing a light blue and white striped shirt. I will be a moderator for this panel and work with Bree Noonan as an access doula. Before we get started, we have a couple of access notes and general housekeeping notes to orient us all. First, we want to thank our sponsors, Illinois Humanities and the American Association of People with Disabilities, as well as thank you to Dr. Jenny Breyer and the team at Listening for Long Haul and Strategies for High Impact Long COVID Justice. We also want to give a shout out to Pro Bono ASL for providing ASL translation services today, and Innis Captioning for providing live captions. Most of us today on the panels are spoonies, chronically ill and disabled, and working on crib time. Some of us need more time while others need less, and some are running on limited energy and capacity. So we invite you to take care of yourselves throughout the session in whatever ways are most comfortable for you. Because access is ongoing and constantly being negotiated, we've also built into the session 7-minute access breaks. For this session, we will hear from all three panelists first before having a break. We will then turn to our panel discussion and Q&A. We hope by building these into the sessions, we're able to practice collective care for the panelists and those of you in attendance today. Furthermore, as I noted, we have a fantastic access doula today with us, Bree Noonan. If you have any access needs or questions that need attention, please send them a message in the chat and we will do our best to support you. Finally, a note on language and pace as it relates to the specific needs that emerge among the long hauler community and are relevant for our today. As a result of long COVID, language and memory can be increasingly difficult and frustrating. For long haulers, this can manifest in challenges speaking and memory call, to name a few. This can generate diverse responses from folks who are navigating new baselines of embodiment and learning to stop, rest, and pace. These experiences are also a part of crib time, and so riffing off of disability studies scholar Allison Kafer, we invite you today to reflect on the ways long haulers are bending the clock to meet their diverse and emergent access needs. And now, without further ado, I am excited and thrilled to introduce our first panelist for today, Dr. Jenny Breyer. She is a professor of gender and women's studies and history at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and project lead for Listening for the Long Haul, A Living History of Long COVID.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Jackie, and thank you, Christina, for signing for me. I appreciate it. I'm so honored to be here today to talk on this program, Breathing for Justice, that I remember emerging out of Sarah and Jackie's conversations together, and that they have brought it to this level of organization and just incredible production. Is really an honor to get to work with them. I met Sarah and Jackie in a class that I taught, I want to say now 2 years ago, which is hard to believe, speaking of bending time, where we were learning about how oral history can be part of how we understand long COVID. And it has blossomed into something much larger than I think any of us could have ever imagined. Jackie came and presented to that class one evening 2 springs ago. And the idea for this project really came out of an ongoing relationship and conversation that I have with an activist named J.D. Davids, who was the former founding director of Long COVID Justice, a project for strategies for high impact. J.D. and I are both involved in an organization, activist collective called What Would an HIV Doula Do? And What Would an HIV Doula Do is a long-standing organization that has been thinking about how to address the ongoing AIDS crisis that continues to this day, think about what it means to care for one another in times of transition, what it means to think about pandemics as something that are chronic. And JD's work in HIV activism for decades before coming to strategies for high impact really aligned with my work and longtime commitment to thinking about the history, both of HIV/AIDS, but also how history can help us think about HIV/AIDS in a much broader context. And that was really the question that I posed was, as a working historian, how can history as a practice or history as a method, a way of understanding the past, of understanding its complexity and its complicatedness, how can a focus on history help this entity called long COVID justice imagine its work? How can it potentially amplify the work that long COVID justice does, particularly in relationship to the idea that they have been at the forefront of making that pandemics are chronic. That is, they go on they're not just sort of emergent crises that come and go or dissolve. They are ongoing, longitudinal, long-standing conditions, but also, in particular, that long COVID is about time. So when Sarah said this notion of crypt time or bending the clock, what would it mean for a historian who thinks about time, usually change over time in the past? How could we engage in an ongoing dialogue with people who are thinking about time in relationship to chronic illness? And that convergence, that coming together, that intellectual and political commitment is what produced the ideas that came to be at the center of this project. So I'm interested in oral history as a practice that anyone can do. Too often it seems like historians are the ones who are the interviewers and people narrate their oral histories, but I'm really interested in trying to change that up and bend that dyad in such a way that we can recognize that anyone and everyone can be the historian of their own life. So if we can agree that that for us to understand both history of long COVID as a chronic condition that likely began sometime in 2020, but we also understand it in relationship to lots of other chronic conditions, but also post-infection chronic conditions. We really can start to understand where people living with long COVID fit in that historical trajectory. We can also understand where long COVID fits in a much larger trajectory, historical trajectory of changing political landscape and a decline in a public health enterprise, which preceded COVID by a long time, but also very much how long COVID has been shaped by this current rise and onset of authoritarianism and fascism, white supremacy, and the way they function in how long COVID is experienced, how the state thinks about long COVID, and how primarily people living with long COVID and associated conditions are historians of this tumultuous period that we are currently in. So we really worked for a summer in learning how to do oral history with one another, and that is what produced this website that I think has already been shared today. I'm going to share some other parts of it to get us back into the swing of things for the second half of the day. And really, it is focused on listening. I think often oral history can be focused on talking and not enough on listening. And so as I watch Christina sign my words, we're really trying to understand how listening happens both through various forms of cognition, whether it's hearing or reading sign language or experiencing sign language, or feeling it in your body, feeling the sound in your body. And then there are just many, many, many more ways to listen. But we're really trying to tap into that experience of how we can understand and experience how people describe their lives in a lot of different ways. So since we're just having a change in ASL interpreters, I'm gonna just cue that I'm going to open a file. I'm going to open the website and share the screen, and I'm going to play a recording that is a product of our sound editor taking the start of all of the Zoom conversations that we had. So for people who are listening and have the sound turned up, it's cacophonous. So I just want to prepare you for that. If you don't like the way it sounds, just turn the sound down. For our sign language interpreters, perhaps you could sign the feeling of it because you won't be able to discern the words. But I just want you to hear this piece because it speaks to the moment we were doing the work. Every single interview here was done on Zoom, which is really a product of this moment in time for us. And here we are back on Zoom. So I'm gonna switch screens now, and you'll see the one of the pages of the website of Listening for the Long Haul. There's a color bar at the top, and maybe we'll look at it some more. And I know you've probably seen some of it already. This is on the About page, where I want to spend the rest of my time talking about two pages here. The first one is our methodology, and the second one is the deep historical listening. So let's start with our methodology. So this gives you a sort of overview of the way we created the project. We trained groups of people from Long COVID Justice and from UIC together to learn how to do oral histories with people living with long COVID. And we have interviewed over 20 people, and almost all of them are featured here. And you've heard from some of them already, but my two co-panelists are both featured here. And so we can play some of their sound later if they'd like. But I want you to hear this piece that is a product of the sound editor mistakenly running all of the tapes at the same time.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, perfect.
All right, so we are here.
My name is
Tim Johnson.
Thank you. when I heard that, and it's a little hard to hear, but when we fully launch the website, you'll be able to listen to it in your own space. But it was really important to us to include that feeling of this meeting is being recorded, of knowing that all of these sounds that were happening at the same time on Zooms across the country, and really for us across the continent. We had people in Canada, people in the States. We had some recordings in Spanish, some in English. That you were able to hear the confluence of those voices and not necessarily discern them from one another, but know that they were all happening at the same time. The other piece that I want to talk about in closing is about this concept that I'm really hoping I can learn from all of you today and sort of move forward as I think about it, which is, we came up with the title of the project, Listening for the Long Haul, obviously to tap into the name, the terminology of long haulers, but also to capture this idea of listening and hearing. And that really made me think about what long haul listening is. What does it mean to listen to something for a long time? What does it mean to make a commitment to listen to something as it happens again and again and again? And what is the relationship between this listening for the long haul or long haul listening and this concept that we talked about, some deep listening, which is really being quiet and listening to what's happening, paying attention to what's happening, not imagining what your next sentence is going to be, but listening to what's happening. And then I'm really interested in thinking about this idea of deep historical listening. So what is it like to listen to all of these oral histories? When the website is done, there will be hundreds of hours of oral history interviews that you can listen to or read. So we're really trying to think about making sure that they're always accessible to people in different ways, through the sound of it, and also the text of it. And is there a way to practice a kind of deep historical listening that will allow us to understand the sometimes cacophonous meaning of long COVID and what it means to be a long hauler, at the same time as we apply this commitment to ongoing listening to the way people talk about what has happened to them and why it's happened to them, and to believe them when they talk about all of these things, and how to apply that to this idea really of how you bend that clock, how you bend the clock of historical time, and how long COVID helps us see things and hear things and experience things that we couldn't otherwise experience. So I'll leave it there, and say thank you. Thank you to the interpreters and for having me here. I'm really excited.
Thank you, Jenny. This is Sarah. Our next speaker is Morgan Lee Davies. She is a writer in Brooklyn whose work has appeared in a range of publications, including the Sick Times, Electric Lit, Jezebel, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. She has lived with long COVID since 2022 and complex chronic illness since 2011. In addition to being a long COVID advocate, Morgan volunteers as a mentor to young writers through Girls Write Now.
Hello, everyone. I am thrilled to be here. I have quite a lot to say, so I'll be keeping an eye on the time, and if I have to jump ahead, I will do so. I want to thank, first of all, everyone who's spoken today has been so wonderful. Also, of course, upsetting to listen to all of you. Thank as well Breathing for Justice and Long COVID Justice for putting all of this together, and the University of Illinois and Strategies for High Impact for making this project possible. I feel really honored to be a part of this oral history and to be participating today. And of course, to Sarah for moderating this, and to our interpreters. This is the first time I've been interpreted for, so I feel really thrilled about that. But to jump right in, I want to begin by giving an overview of my own history as a patient before and after I contracted the case of COVID that would lead to long COVID in the fall of 2022. As Sarah just mentioned, my medical issues began in 2011 when I was a junior in college, and these symptoms sprang up seemingly without cause, and most of them resisted diagnosis for years to come. In the course of 6 months or so, I began to experience debilitating, though infrequent, migraines, acid reflux and other gastrointestinal issues, lockjaw, and a severe and mystifying ankle injury, I'm doing finger quotes, that was not precipitated by any actual injury, a fact that few orthopedists over the following years seemed to believe. Yet all that had happened was that one afternoon, while walking around the Metropolitan Museum of Art with a friend, I simply could not walk on my right ankle any longer. I subsequently found myself walking in an orthopedic boot for months. This barrage of ailments began my long quest to find answers about what was happening inside my body. As the years passed, my physical ailments multiplied, but almost no doctor was able to provide insight into any of my symptoms. After my right ankle mysteriously failed, I experienced a similar injury in my left shoulder and later in my lower back, but doctors and physical therapists alike regarded these injuries with mystification. Repeated imaging and tests of various body parts showed nothing. I grew used to hearing doctors cheerfully tell me that my tests or scans had come back normal, at which point I would feel a sense of despair because a positive test would at least prove that something was wrong with me. The one MRI that my orthopedist did think showed a tear in my ankle ligament was apparently misleading. After I went through multiple stints of wearing the orthopedic boot, that MRI led to an arthroscopic surgery, but when I woke up from the anesthesia, my doctor informed me that there actually hadn't been a tear after all, only inflammation, which they had cleaned out. And fortunately, I had good health insurance at this time through my father. I was still under 26, which covered this procedure. And it did help. I didn't have to wear the orthopedic boot again. But my ankle has never fully recovered, and nor has my shoulder. A physical therapist simply gave up on that shoulder after months of sessions, telling me that it was not worth my continuing to spend a great deal of money on a treatment that was obviously not working. For a period of time, especially in my early 20s, I was obsessed with finding a diagnosis. I have many memories of going to doctor's appointments and proposing rare diagnoses to them to try to explain what was causing one or many of my myriad symptoms. The doctors I saw reacted with sympathy, pity, irritation, or outright callousness, but all of them dismissed my theories. Most of the diagnoses I proposed were, I can readily admit now, absurdly wrong. But the doctors I saw had no alternative theories and for the most part seemed uninterested in finding answers to my physical problems, especially after they saw my negative test results. Over these years of appointments, I learned to treat the physicians I saw with skepticism, rather than viewing them as awesome figures wielding inaccessible authority and knowledge. Most of these doctors were personally unobjectionable, if unhelpful, but some seemed to view the mystery of my symptoms as a personal attack. During one memorable visit, after a battery of tests had come back normal, I told one gastroenterologist that I was experiencing flares of gastrointestinal attacks and joint pain simultaneously. She aggressively told me that this was not possible because according to the tests, there was no inflammation in my body. Instead, she insisted that a medication I took for migraines, which I had begun taking 2 years after my gastrointestinal troubles began, was responsible for my symptoms. I had no idea how to respond. What can you say to a doctor who tells you, point blank, that you are not experiencing the physical sensations that you are, in fact, experiencing. Later, a rheumatologist speculated that I have a form of arthritis caused by gastrointestinal dysfunction. This diagnosis was speculative and not particularly treatable, but I found it vindicating nevertheless. As Megan O'Rourke writes in her book, The Invisible Kingdom, the problem lies less with individual doctors, though some, including that gastroenterologist, are obviously less attuned to their patients than others, than the system that produces them. The most alarming fact I learned, she writes, when I began my research, was how quickly doctors' empathy wanes. Multiple studies show that it plunges in the third year of medical school, declining when students start seeing patients on rotation and, overlooked and overtired, they realize that there is too much work to be done in too little time, or end up distancing themselves self-protectively from their patients in order to survive. This dynamic is no doubt enhanced by America's system of managed care, dictated by private health insurance companies, private equity firms, and other privatized interests, which force doctors to see as many patients as possible in a day to maximize profit. A few weeks ago, I spent an hour at an appointment with a new allergist who meticulously recorded all of my many symptoms in her notes and empathized effusively with my physical distress. This experience was shocking, not only because I am not used to being taken so seriously or treated so kindly by physicians, but also because I don't think I have ever spent so much time with a doctor at a single appointment before. She had sacrificed her lunch hour to spend that time with me. I am going into so much detail about these past experiences to contextualize the dysfunction of the American medical system and to ground the experience that I had interfacing with doctors as a long COVID patient. And as an aside, I think we all know that what I've described and what I will describe is much less bad than some other people have already said today. In many ways, I'm lucky that I am white, even though obviously women face more medical discrimination than men. And the fact that I am highly educated and informed about medicine, as I'll continue to say, was an advantage for me. But I still faced a lot of discrimination and unhelpful treatment. So by the time I did get that fateful case of COVID, I was really used to interfacing with doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals because I had spent over a decade doing so. I was used to being dismissed, talked down to, and in general, not taken seriously. I was used to being treated as a medical mystery with no solution, and I did not expect doctors to be able to treat my symptoms effectively. By that age, I had mostly given up on the prospect of a satisfying diagnosis for whatever was ailing me. I deeply believed that there was some underlying syndrome connecting my symptoms, but whatever it was, doctors either hadn't discovered it yet or would never connect it to what I was experiencing. I was, therefore, weirdly vindicated by receiving a long COVID diagnosis, complete with a positive PCR test from an emergency room visit, despite the fact that long COVID dramatically worsened my health and functionality. Now I spend most of my time in bed due to fatigue and rarely leave my apartment except for doctor's appointments. I also suffer from daily headaches and migraines multiple times a week. Yet I felt gratified by the fact that I felt that I could now call myself disabled without hesitation. Though I can now look back and realize that I was disabled for most of my adult life, without a clear diagnosis, I felt fraudulent adopting the term. At the same time, I had no expectation that the doctors I saw would have anything helpful to say to me. And as I predicted, in the past 2.5 years, I have received almost no helpful advice or treatment. Instead, I have been assured that my fatigue would resolve, something no one versed in ME/CFS would claim. Been told to exercise by more doctors than I can count, ditto, and encountered many, many nurses and technicians who did not even know what long COVID was. On one memorable occasion, I had to repeatedly reassure a radiologist that I was not contagious. On another, a doctor administrating a stress test asked me about my exercise regimen and seemed confused when I explained that I had none. A subsequent doctor administering a medically induced stress test grew impatient when I struggled to kick during the procedure. Why? He asked, irritated, when I told him I couldn't go on. These experiences were upsetting, but I was not surprised by them given my previous experiences as a patient. As an experienced patient and a highly educated person, I am now confident in my own instincts and not as intimidated by doctors as I was in my early 20s, when I frequently broke down crying during appointments when my symptoms were not taken seriously. I now know to disregard advice that doesn't suit me, to harangue offices for imaging or other appointments, even when they are unhelpful, and in general, not to take the lack of care or consideration I receive from so many doctors so personally. Obviously, some of my doctors have been compassionate and diligent, but even those doctors cannot treat long COVID, an illness for which there are really no meaningful treatments, as we all know, at least not for ME/CFS, which is what has primarily affected me. All this leads to my greater point, which is that communities of disabled and chronically ill people, like so many of us gathered here today, need to form alternative sources of knowledge to serve as a counterweight to the medical establishment. This is hardly a novel idea. Obviously, countless advocacy groups, forums, and websites exist to further this goal. Nevertheless, I think it behooves us to continue to challenge the hierarchical power structure of medicine and how this structure affects our role as patients. I see a connection here to the hierarchical structure of the academy, yet another source of knowledge creation that is deeply hierarchical, as well as ableist, but can yield productive collaborations and community, like the discussion we're engaged in today. My attitude toward doctors and medicine is somewhat paradoxical, or at least it feels that way to me, because I am so unsuited to the sciences. I would be the first to tell you that I am not equipped to understand all kinds of granular scientific concepts and data, and I certainly do not think our current government's defunding of the NIH and labs across the country is anything other than a tragedy. I need doctors and the medicines they prescribe to function. I was recently reading Carl Elliott's book, The Occasional Human Sacrifice, in which he tells stories of serious medical abuses perpetrated by medical researchers and the whistleblowers who worked to reveal the truth about these studies. The picture of academic medicine, i.e., the environment that produces the research that we all hope will one day develop treatments for long COVID, was not encouraging. Many of Elliott's whistleblowers, I quote, had harsh words for the culture of academic medicine more generally. The arrogance, the authoritarianism, the rigid status hierarchy, the soulless anti-intellectualism. As this is not my field, I can't comment further on the specifics of these problems, but I think we can probably all recognize some of the experiences we've had with doctors who are not researchers in this description. We need these researchers to discover treatments and further develop our scientific understanding of diseases. But in the future, I hope to live in a world that treats medicine as less hierarchical and cloistered, and instead as a collaboration between doctors and patients. This hierarchical system, in addition to encouraging bad impulses in academic medicine, negatively affects the care patients receive. As Alan Bleakley has written, where medicine remains structurally undemocratic, dysfunctional hierarchies and autocracies will persist in clinical teamwork, and paternalism will prevail in consultations, placing patients at risk by compromising communication essential for effective systems-based healthcare that includes accurate diagnoses and referrals. Effective communication between medical teams and between those teams and their patients, he emphasizes, is crucial to positive patient outcomes. He cites a 2008 study that found that 70 to 80% of healthcare errors are caused by human factors associated with poor team communication and understanding. I'm going to skip a paragraph because it's going on for a long time. As I said, the hierarchical structures of medicine are mirrored in academia, and indeed academic medicine fuses those two spheres. Though I have a master's degree, I do not work within the academy, as you can probably tell from the tenor of this paper so far, and have not been in grad school for several years now. I have, however, worked extensively as a researcher for hire and have used oral history materials in the past while putting together historical research for other people's book projects. I was excited about participating and listening for the long haul in part because I have spent so much time in the archive as a student and as an independent worker, both physically and online. I think we can all agree that one oral history project is unlikely to solve the problems of patient knowledge, let alone patient access, I've been describing and that have come up throughout the day. Yet a publicly available project like this also offers an alternative to the strict hierarchies of academic knowledge, which privilege PhDs and professors, excuse me, and hide most research between highly inaccessible journal paywalls. This work is also inaccessible to most people by virtue of its jargon. As I said, I cannot understand most medical papers. Not all research should be simplified for a mainstream audience. Jargon is sometimes inevitable and useful. But the academy is not the only way to build or disseminate knowledge. Online resources like this one, which privilege patient experience, can serve as a valuable alternative. An alternative that can grow from both within and outside the academy, as this project has. Those similar resources need not bear a university stamp of approval. The project's emphasis on long-form conversations also provides a contrast to the brief, dehumanizing rush of doctor's appointments in our managed care system. These conversations, which obviously have a different goal from a doctor's appointment, but also delve into medical experiences and symptoms, privilege a holistic understanding of each participant's life experience, illness experience, and self-conception as a disabled person. If we use a disability justice framework, resources like this project and the conversation we are having today are a form of interdependence as well as radical and collective access, though perhaps a different form of access than the meaning traditionally associated with that word in disability spaces. This oral history project is a form of community building, as well as a resource for fellow long haulers to learn from each other as patients and as advocates, and for other people, I hope, to learn from us. We need our knowledge and information to be as widely available as possible to people who need it, especially those people who, unlike me, lack years of preparation of fighting with medical authorities when they fall ill. Grassroots knowledge, unlike knowledge sanctioned by medicine, the academy, or especially centers of academic medicine, can provide insights and especially emotional truths that those forums are less likely to access. This kind of knowledge sharing is particularly valuable given the power structures authority have in dictating and defining supposed medical reality and disability status. As Irving Zola wrote in 1972, medicine is becoming the new repository of truth, the place where absolute and often final judgments are made by supposedly morally neutral and objective experts. As we all know, doctors are not morally neutral or objective. Their conclusions are based on their own racial and gender biases and shaped by the training they receive. But they are endowed with enormous levels of power, including the power to shape the lived realities of the people they treat. So, unfortunately, is the government, which dictates whether individuals are legally disabled or not. Last week, I received a denial of my appeal for disability benefits, so I speak here from very personal experience at the moment. In reading sources for this presentation, though, I found myself reflecting on my hesitancy to consider myself disabled in my 20s. For many years, it wouldn't have occurred to me to attach that label to myself, even though I clearly was physically limited by my joint problems. Later, when my symptoms were severe enough that I felt I really did qualify, I hesitated to adopt the label because I did not feel, quote unquote, legitimate. This sense of confusion is particularly relevant to the long COVID discussion because so many people struggle to obtain a diagnosis, having never officially tested positive or facing so much skepticism from doctors when they try to seek care. At this time, under the current presidential administration, we do not have the power to change the disability benefit system. Indeed, disabled people and other marginalized groups are increasingly under legal threat, as I'm sure I don't need to remind you all. It is more essential than ever, therefore, that we form alternative centers of knowledge and resources. It falls to us to combat this hostility, as well as the antipathy toward COVID and long COVID that has persisted through multiple presidential administrations. As universities are targeted by the government and consider instituting mask bans, my alma mater, Columbia University, has instituted such a ban to my immense disappointment. And as medical research is defunded, we find ourselves increasingly on our own. Though I'd really prefer to live in a country with a more supportive government, one that robustly supports medical research, as well as the practical lives of disabled people, the failure of the state to support us doesn't mean that we can't support each other. and document our experiences not only for the benefit of our fellow patients, but also for the future patients and scholars but also for future patients and scholars to understand the experience of long COVID from a patient perspective rather than through the eyes of doctors and researchers alone. And that's all I have. Thank you, everyone.
This is Sarah speaking. Thank you so much, Morgan. I really appreciated your presentation and found myself taking a lot of notes and being like, oh my goodness, same, and just thinking about so much in relationship to patient advocacy and navigating disability and chronic illness diagnoses. So thank you so much. Our next panelist is Dr. Ileana Pagan Tettelbaum. She is a Puerto Rican educator, writer, and filmmaker and artist. She is an associate professor of languages and cultures at West Chester University of Pennsylvania.
Hola, I am Dr. Ileana Pagan Teitelbaum, pronouns she, ella. I am a light-skinned Latinx woman with shoulder-length brown hair, brown eyes, glasses, and behind me, there is a virtual background of books on shelves. Today, I will speak and share poetry about pedagogy of exploitation, long COVID, and disability in academia. As a content and care announcement, my talk contains references to sensitive topics of faculty illness, disability, and death. And there was a question in the Q&A, what is academia? By academia, I refer to the university and the people who are producing knowledge and teaching and learning in the university system. I want to talk today about how educators have developed inclusive pedagogy frameworks to meet an increasing demand for service and care for students in higher education. Research shows that pedagogies committed to equity, inclusion, social justice can improve learning experiences and outcomes and strengthen the educator-student bond. Pedagogies of inclusion center care in the educational experience. They incorporate universal design, are trauma-informed, are culturally responsive. They reflect on the grading system. They create non-hierarchical relationships, and they practice a pedagogy of non-domination. All of this requires considerable time and labor. And this is where my concern about pedagogy of exploitation arises. Universities benefit from the increased enrollment and retention that inclusive pedagogies foster. However, the work required to implement inclusive pedagogies is often not compensated. While faculty, especially faculty with intersectionally marginalized identities, invest more and more effort into invisible care work that is time-consuming and emotionally taxing, we usually do not have other commitments reduced to ensure a manageable work-life balance. And we are not compensated proportionately, if at all, for this labor. This creates what I call a pedagogy of exploitation in academia, where faculty are taught to, expected to, and coerced into exploiting our own time and energy for the well-being and advancement of others until we burn out, get sick, become disabled, must leave our job, lose our job, or until we die prematurely. While it may sound extreme, faculty death is not as rare as one may think. I myself have lost 3 colleagues in the past few years. May they rest in peace and power. All of my colleagues who passed belonged to marginalized identities. Other colleagues survived, but had to leave their dream jobs to survive. Other faculty have become chronically ill and disabled, like myself. Very few disabled and sick faculty are in a position to risk being open about their condition in an ableist institution and society. Most mask or hide their condition so that no one knows how many ill and disabled faculty there are on campus, actually. Caring faculty are susceptible to exploitation precisely because we care about the flourishing of our students. In her 2024 essay on care exploitation in academia, Lavender McKittrick Schweitzer defines care exploitation as a failure to respect someone's dignity by taking advantage of their vulnerability, which arises from caring about others. And I will have 4 of these definitions on my handout that will be in the chat, as well as my poems. Faculty who are invested in the well-being of our students can be impacted by burdened virtues. According to Lisa Tessman in 2005, burdened virtues are virtues that, quote, fail to enable their bearers to flourish, end quote. In this context, care exploitation of burdened values often occurs when professors are called to aid students, where the call to aid is made with the presumption that they will do whatever task, incur whatever risk in order to care for students. Schweitzer poses that invisible care work, quote, falls most heavily on those who are underrepresented and historically marginalized, especially when serving students that share axes of their identities through care work that is emotionally taxing and time-consuming, end quote. I will now read a poem titled Time for Me, after January Jill O'Neill and Byung-Chul Han. Time for me. Time for me. This time for me is not brought to you with the support of the respect of my university job for the need of female professors to rest, nor by the understanding of my little family that mom needs alone time to recharge energies and spirit, nor by the concern of community organizations like the School Council of Parents or the Latinx Social Justice Collective for caring for their members to avoid burnout in this society of exhaustion, nor by the request that my doctor denied me to take a partial leave of absence to recover from the harm done to my body-mind by 5 years of workplace harassment. How ironic. This time for me is brought to you with the dangerous patronage of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, so persistent in its second super contagious strain, world-renowned since 2019, belonging to the calamitous clade of the phylogenetic tree of the ferocious family of the Coronaviridae, of the genocidal genus Beta coronavirus, of the subsurgent subgenus Sarbe coronavirus, of the spiny species of the SARS virus, or SRAS by its Spanish acronym. This time for me brought viciously to my being by way of a disabling stroke of luck that brought me life in the time of disability, crip time, time in bed space, an ironic time, deprived of roles, work, outings, time of essence, breathing, sleeping, healing for 1,036 days and counting. What does this time for me mean now? Poem. Pedagogies of exploitation can be obscured by a structurally reinforced myth that educational work is its own reward. This may make faculty feel like our work does not warrant fair compensation and appreciation. Academic institutions place faculty in a double bind by issuing calls to aid students that undermine faculty no matter how they respond. According to Sukaina Hirji, an oppressive double bind is a situation when, quote, a member of an oppressed group is forced to choose between cooperating with and resisting some oppressive norm, and in which whatever the agent does, they end up reinforcing to some degree the oppressive structures in place, end quote. If faculty respond to a call to aid students, we risk being exploited. If we don't respond, we go against our own values to work against oppression. We also risk losing credibility and power, being judged, and being denied participation in decision-making about equity. In Stories from the Front of the Room, How Higher Education Faculty of Color Overcome Challenges and Thrive in the Academy, Michelle Harris et al. Discuss the cultural taxation that faculty of color endure from administration, student demands, and the stress of toxic workplace environments. Cultural taxation is the extra work that faculty of color are expected to do to represent their ethnicity, identity, culture in a university setting, but without proper compensation or recognition. These faculty can also be used by a non-white faculty to attract benefits to their department through funding or diversity initiatives. Marginalized faculty negotiate the unrealistic expectation that they represent their racial, ethnic, or identity group through, I quote, above average performance in teaching, research, and service, while facing a deficit of credibility due to racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination, end quote. To understand the implications of a pedagogy of exploitation, I offer my own experience as a disabled female Puerto Rican faculty member in a humanities department at a public university in Pennsylvania. I am a teacher scholar concerned with issues that Black and Brown and disabled students face on campus. I am the faculty advisor for the Latino American Student Organization, and I co-founded the Latinx Social Justice Collective, as well as the Racial and Social Justice Research Council on campus. I am often approached for advice about navigating university life by faculty, staff, and students of color. I have worked as an advocate for equity and shared information on inclusive practices informed by student perspectives at my institution. This work, while necessary and pressing, has largely been invisible. I know from the positive impacts experienced by students that this work is valuable. I also know that it is emotionally exhausting and largely uncompensated. It made my tenure and promotion process more daunting and has taken significant time that could be dedicated to research, creative endeavors, personal interests, time with friends and family, and rest. For 8 years, I convinced myself of the urgency that I do this uncompensated work at my first tenure track job. I'd say I fell prey to the myth that my work is its own reward right now because I felt that students in our non-ideal world required help and solidarity. I wasn't willing to step back and do nothing before an unjust status quo. I felt that inaction would have undermined the well-being of marginalized students. I felt like I had no choice. For years, I felt pulled in all directions. I felt pressure to produce more research, obtain better teaching evaluations, do more service than my non-marginalized peers. And I did it. I did all of that, all the while being harassed by a European male peer, for which I fought a DEI case for years on behalf of all the Latinx women that had been harassed by this man of privilege, a man who faced zero consequences for his actions. At the same time, I wanted to be a dedicated parent to my kids, a good partner to my spouse, a good daughter to my aging parents, one of whom passed away while I was active on a campus strike. By year 8 on campus, my immune system started to fail. When I asked my white doctor to support me for a partial leave of absence due to anxiety, burnout, and a year-long fever whose cause could not be determined, she denied my request. The next month, I got COVID for the first time at a campus social justice retreat, and I became disabled by severe long COVID. As a Latinx woman in my 40s, I was at higher risk for long SARS-CoV-2, just as marginalized people were at higher risk of long SARS-CoV-1 in the years 2002 and 2003. Today, I'm in bed 23 hours a day. I use a wheelchair. I'm unable to perform any household chores or major life activities. I had to take a year of medical leave, and I returned to work with partial leave, teaching from bed. I am presenting from bed right now. In spite of my severe disability, HR denied my request for ADA accommodations at my institution. Most of my able-bodied and able-minded white peers have been promoted to full professor. Sometimes I feel discouraged, like I gave my health and well-being to an institution that is ready to discard me as soon as they have drawn out my last drop of blood. This feeling is compounded by the realization that while I survived, other colleagues did not. Under the weight of traumatic losses, I have struggled to understand my value and identity as a newly disabled Latinx woman, I realized that helping my students get educated and attain equity requires that I stay alive. I will end with the poem, Flag of Resistance, for disabled comrades across the world, especially those with long COVID and ME/CFS. I continued to live despite the hurt of it all, the pandemic that never ended, the illness that never healed, the friends that never spoke to me again, the society that never accommodated me, the world that I never saw in person again when I became disabled. Fine then, I'll leave it like a tree who, uprooted by a hurricane wind, keeps growing as it lays flat on its side, or like half the population of my island, Puerto Rico, forced off our beloved lands, eternally dreaming of an impossible return. I'll leave it all and embark on a new yearning, a greening of my soul, a sprouting of my self-love, a flowering of my courage, a wilting of regrets, a nourishing of my roots, a love of my disabled body-mind, unfurling like a flag of resistance in spring. Poem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ileana, for sharing all that you shared today. I'm reminded of Audre Lorde's claim that poetry is not a luxury, but a vital part of our existence and our life worlds. So thank you for that. We're going to take an access break for 7 minutes, and then we'll come back to finish up with a panel discussion and Q&A. So let me do math, but come back in 7 minutes. Oh, all right, everybody. We are going to open it up with a panel discussion. I don't know about you, but there's so much to get into. And so I have a couple of questions to get us started with the panelists, but for folks online, if you have questions or comments for the panelists, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A chat and we will get to them. So okay, wait, okay. So, Ileana, Ginny, and Morgan, I'm wondering if, to start us off, I think all three of you touched on this a bit, but I'm wondering if you could maybe dive a little bit deeper on how your relationship or understanding of chronic illness and disability has shifted as a professor, researcher, educator as a result of COVID-19. Are there ways your practices have shifted, questions changed, or ways of teaching, researching, mentoring that have been transformed? Yeah, I'll open it up to anyone who wants to jump in.
For me, becoming disabled, or newly becoming disabled in my 40s, something that was the most helpful was getting to know other disabled people and learning about the disability justice movement, reading about disability justice, and finding value in my being, in my existing, in my being the only human, the only living creature like me that exists in this universe that ever will for millions of years before and after. I am the only Ileana that has ever existed and will exist. And therefore I have value just because I exist. That is my intrinsic value. And I have learned that from the disability community. I am valuable even when I'm not producing, even when I can't move, even when I can't think, even when I can only be, I'm still valuable. That's one of the most transcendental lessons that disability has brought me and that I'm grateful for in this experience, as difficult as it has been with long COVID. And it has meant slowing down, working in crib time, which means I can't force my body, I can't force my mind. I can only work in fragments, do a tiny little bit, and I must stop. And I must stop for hours or days or weeks or months and then continue. And it's really hard to adapt to crib time. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of self-compassion. I'm learning to do self-compassion breaks where I just acknowledge how hard it is to be disabled in an ableist world and a world that doesn't provide the access and care that I need and that a lot of people in my community need.
Yeah, I mean, I that resonates with me a lot. Obviously, our professional situations were and continue to be very different. Um, but I think what you're saying about having to adjust so radically the sort of expectations of what is possible, and especially about time, which Jenny, you were talking about sort of how we think about time differently, which really struck me in your presentation. Um, I was someone who, I mean, was always an overachiever in terms of doing really well in school, hence going to get a master's degree. And when I got sick, I had like a part-time job. I had multiple freelance gigs going on at once. And in order to maintain a lifestyle like that, not that I was making a huge amount of money, you have to just be working all the time and balancing all these different things simultaneously. And one of the jobs that I had, as I mentioned, was as a freelance researcher for people who were working on book projects. And so they were mostly working on like criminal justice topics and then about like investigating something that was going on currently in the United States. And then I would provide the sort of huge historical background that would help contextualize their subjects. So that would involve looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of primary source documents, primarily through online archives, tons and tons and tons of newspaper articles, also, papers, books, old theory, whatever. So it was a range, and I did use some oral history stuff, other sort of recordings and things that you find in archives online. Um, and basically, as a result of getting long COVID, I can no longer do that work. I think I've been less cognitively affected than many people. Um, I can still write and think at a pretty advanced level, I hope, but it takes a lot more time to do those things. And a lot of the sort of complex thinking that is required to synthesize a lot of information that I think is a lot of what research is and what sort of academic thought is just no longer possible. And I also write fiction, and I used to I would plan something and I would like go into a hole for 4 months to just write and write and write and write and write until I had sort of a piece of work. And that is completely not, I mean, that's absurd to even think about. So I think a lot of the ways in which we consider ourselves productive or fetishize the idea of productivity and work in general, obviously, but especially, and I can obviously speaking from my own experience, especially if you're someone who um, prizes intelligence and intellectual work, and that's really where you get a lot of your sort of self-worth from. When I'm obviously speaking about myself here, the fact that you have to slow down so much of that, and I'm sure this is similar for someone who like previously had been a really accomplished athlete and then gets long COVID and then can no longer run, right? Like this applies to many different aspects of life. But for me, it was realizing that the one thing I had always been able to count on, even when I was dealing with serious chronic illness, was my brain. And that I could still sort of push and push and push intellectually, no matter what was going on with me physically. And that's just no longer possible. So there are certain things I fundamentally cannot do, and then a lot of things that I can do, but just takes a lot longer. And I think there is this sort of humbling aspect to that that is both very frustrating, but that also can be helpful in terms of understanding that our value is not tied to our ability to produce things, right? Um, but it changes the relationship to both work in a literal way and also the concept of work, I think, in a very profound way.
This is Jenny. I'm really struck by getting to hear Ileana and Morgan speak in this context. I've listened to you speak in others. Ileana, I've listened to the Spanish, even though I can't always understand all of it, but that's actually okay. And Morgan, I've listened to hours and hours and hours of people talking, and I've listened to it asynchronously. So, part of me was really nervous. I was like, how am I going to listen to all of this? How am I going to do that? And I realized that actually I can listen to it in fits and starts. I can listen to it. The commitment I make to myself when I'm listening is that that's all I'm doing. That's how I decided to approach it. And that sometimes means that I can listen for 2 hours at a stretch, but sometimes it means that I'm listening in 15-minute bursts or re-listening again if I've missed something. And the point that you just made, Morgan, about capitalism is really, there is such an incredible connection across these interviews about how the relationship among chronic illness, long COVID, racial capitalism, meaning the sort of connection between white supremacy and capitalism and what those things mean and how they extract from us, which really speaks to Ileana's point about care extraction and exploitation. Care is the commodity in that case. And so the themes that are interwoven throughout these interviews, I think, are really quite astounding. And for me, I think, as someone who doesn't live with chronic illness, but is married to someone with chronic illness, so my family holds that capacity, and I am a caregiver. I live in a world where my care is sometimes not only distributed to my students, but also means that I have to think about how I move in the world to take care of my family. It has been an attempt to really bend that time, to really think about how I can commit my body mind to doing things in different lengths of time than the length of time that I am told. So I think about Ileana describing teaching a seminar from bed, that's 90 minutes or however long it is. And part of what has really changed for me in coming into these intellectual and political and relational connections around long COVID has been really being much more honest about the amount of time things take and what I can control of that and what I can't, and how I can remove myself from things and when I can't. And that has been really, I think I saw in the chat people talking about how the breaks really matter for them to be able to stay. And we thought a lot about that when we were organizing with Kamara, who you heard from this morning, the curriculum that we all worked on together, but also listening to these interviews and making the decision to put them all together in one, I'm a Gen Xer, put them together in one tape and not in one file. And you can hear the way time gets stitched into the interviews, right? I need a break. We're coming back from a break. But also, I don't know, I'll be interested to hear what other people experience, but when you listen to the long form interviews, and you hear people talking about brain fog, talking about cognitive changes to their body minds, but also they are some of the most lucid and ordered conversations I've ever heard in an oral history. So there's something also about how and maybe that's about performing, or maybe it's about actually feeling the experience of being listened to can help us. Having that experience of being heard, of being able to experience that feeling is, to me, part of what happens through a project that combines people living with chronic illness, in this case, long COVID and associated conditions, a lot of people with ME/CFS, and the experience of not just speaking, but actually knowing that you're being heard, what that can do. And there are a ton of questions in the Q&A. So Sarah, I'll leave it to you.
Yes. Yes, thank you for that, Jenny. Yeah, I wanted to turn to the chat. There are several questions, and I'll put them in the chat as well. But the one question I think we could begin to riff on is this question from someone anonymous, but they're asking, can anyone speak to the grief that comes with becoming disabled and moving through it, especially in a world that is leaving us all behind?
Um, I mean, I definitely want to hear Ileana answer this too. Ileana and I are really good friends. We we were in the same support group, so it was very funny to me when I found out we were both going to be on this panel. Though I learned things today that I had not heard before in your amazing presentation, so it's been really great. But I feel like I have an interesting perspective on this because, as I was describing, I had been so physically compromised before getting long COVID. I think part of the reason why it wouldn't have occurred to me to describe myself as disabled the first half of my 20s, say, was that like I definitely was having real problems, but there were still tons of things that I could do um, to live a pretty normal life. By the time I was in my late 20s and especially early 30s, up to before getting long COVID, I was living a very circumscribed life. Like I was dealing with really, really severe chronic pain. My stomach was awful, which it still is. And so I was instead like the way my internalized ableism was manifesting was sort of like, do I count? Like, is that okay? So there was this sense of relief, as I said, to be like, okay, finally, like I'm official. That said, the adjustment between even the very circumscribed life that I was leading up before that, and then what happened when I got long COVID was very dramatic because I had never experienced anything like ME/CFS before. Like, I mean, it's so devastating. And in addition to being physically very devastating, the psychological impacts were really profound. So I was already, again, as I said, completely jaded about the medical system. I had no faith in doctors. I was primed to go into those appointments and not take anything they said seriously if I thought it sounded stupid. I didn't have any hope when I went in to talk to those people. But because I was just this kind of like weird freak case, not that that's an uncommon thing for women, but I wasn't like connected to a wider problem so much. I probably could have been, but it felt like it was more this strange thing that was happening to me. Reading Megan O'Rourke's book actually was really, really helpful because she writes about these sort of weird cases where no one knows what's going on, and that was before I got long COVID. But after long COVID, I think the grief and rage was more to do with society completely disregarding this as a problem. Um, Everybody just moving on as though nothing is the matter. Most of my friends have been really, really supportive, but most of them also have moved on. And I don't blame them personally. Like, this is what society has done. But it's really, really difficult, I think, to live in a world where the government just doesn't care about you at all, like actively wishes you ill and currently. Um, and you just feel completely invisible. I mean, I talked about this in that oral history. The feeling of absolute sort of nullification, I think, was harder for me than almost anything else about even the physical stuff, where about like I didn't have any grief about like identifying as disabled, which I think can be very difficult for some people to sort of make that imaginative leap. Like, that was fine. It was the total lack of empathy or respect from the wider community, including, I should say, my father, from whom I am now estranged. Um, that's really, really hard when you just aren't taken seriously by people you love, but also by this sort of the world at large, right? It's the combination of those two things I think was really, really difficult for me.
I think grief is huge. It's a huge part of the process of getting long COVID, becoming so ill, and something that was really new to me. I had experienced becoming ill and having limitations to my body, but I had never experienced becoming so ill that I had limitations in my mind, and that thinking could actually hurt, and could make me physically very, very explosively ill, and in terrible pain for hours, just for thinking more than 5 minutes. And I was used to using my mind freely for all my life up to having long COVID. So for me, the process of dealing with grief mainly centered on accepting and understanding my new identity, as I am now a disabled woman. And what does this mean for me now to be a disabled person? Finding other disabled people and community is what saves me. I have tried on 3 occasions to participate in able-bodied community, in non-sick communities, and it has been such a struggle. It has been so frustrating, and I have been so excluded. I have had to fight for access with so much energy that it really made me not want to be in those spaces. So I am mostly participating and having community with other sick people, other disabled people. And that has brought me a lot of joy, a lot of love and understanding. I have been able to create art and poetry and writing with other disabled people in Pillow Writers, in the Writers Guild of America initiative workshops with TD Mitchell. We kept meeting for years and now have our own group. I have kept writing with the long COVID community on Discord. If anybody is interested in finding that, you can email me, contact me through the links. And you can see in my poetry that I express a lot of grief, but also a newfound strength and resistance, and a newfound ability to just know myself and know others for their true essence and value and what they, the life and the love that they bring to the world.
I guess I would just say one thing about grief. I think it for me, part of it is also having access to spaces online has really made a difference in terms of being together. There's a question in the chat about masking and what it means to think about creating a space with people who are still experiencing COVID, and really understanding that any decision to focus on the history of COVID means that we have to think about long COVID. Long COVID isn't over. COVID isn't over. AIDS isn't over. And I think being in conversation with people who understand that it's a sort of constant process of transition, as I said at the start of my talk, my commitment to what would an HIV doula do is really partially that, especially online spaces are spaces where people can be in conversation with one another in a way that allows them to do it from bed, that allows them to do it laying down or sitting up, allows them to be taking care of other parts of their lives, or allows them to just turn off the camera and just listen, to rest their brains, or to look and not listen. I mean, whatever the case may be. And that is, I think the idea of stop, rest, pace is useful. I don't think it's complete. I don't think it does everything, but it is a way to feel, which is part of what I think grieving calls on us to do. And for people who often live a life of a mind, hearing Ileana describe that sense that she could always be in her mind except for when it hurt her body. That is, I think the other piece of it is very challenging for academics. We tend to live in our minds, and we don't always live in our body minds. And so grief requires trying to be in your body mind more than in just your mind.
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation on this question. I think one more that kind of fits the tenor of the discussion is a question, I think, in response to a lot of the things that all three of you were sharing. But the question is, any recommendations for building disabled community?
I can answer a part of that, and also with another question that was in the Q&A about the impact of COVID on Latino communities. There's so much long COVID in Latinx communities, but no one knows the term, including our doctors, if we have a doctor. And we are at higher risk, but have less access to care, to rest, to treatment, and to disabled community. And that's one of the reasons that this month in April, I co-founded Pillow Writers en Español to create a space for Spanish speakers with long COVID and ME to connect globally. But I think it is really important to build disabled community. I, for example, joined the Thunder and Lightning Collective for disabled, BIPOC, and queer poets. And what an amazing experience. Everything is done with so much care, so much access, and hearing other artists, what they create, just fills my soul so much. So I think it is important to find other disabled people online and start getting to know them very slowly within your capacities, a lot of rest, but it will fill your soul. And it's important, in order to do that, in order to build disabled community, you have to see disability as a spectrum, because I think a lot of us had trouble identifying in the beginning as, oh, I'm disabled, because we have an archaic image of disability is when you're paralyzed, and anything else, you're not disabled. But in fact, there's a range of experiences of chronic illness and disability that don't always have to do with mobility, but they can have to do with mobility. They impact your body and your mind, and they can fluctuate. Some days I'm able to walk to the bathroom, and some days I'm not. And so there are changes in my abilities on an hour-to-hour basis. So understanding that diversity of disability can enable people to identify as disabled and get to know other disabled people and find community.
I would add to that, this is Morgan, that I think you gave two really good examples there. I mean, amongst everything you said. But one is that you were starting something, like connected to a thing that already existed, but you saw an opening for something that was really important and wasn't there, and so needed to be there. But some of the other examples you gave were seeking something out that did already exist and participating in it. And I think, especially with, I mean, there are already a lot of long COVID organizations, but this is obviously still something relatively new, so it's kind of in flux. But there's almost always somebody out there who's already doing something, right? And the group that Ilyana and I are in together was the what she mentioned was the sort of spin-off of the Writers Guild. And now that obviously feels like it has nothing to do with the Writers Guild, like it's just that we are in that community together. But we all wound up there because we made the decision when we saw that the Writers Guild was doing this workshop for people with long COVID, we elected to participate. And doing one writer's workshop, maybe you're not going to find the people who you really connect with, but I think putting yourself out there in as much as you have the energy to do you're going to be able to hopefully interact with people with different experiences who you do eventually form that important connection with. Um, and then there will also definitely be things and spaces that have not been created yet and do need to be made. Um, but I think a lot of it is also kind of like spontaneous kismet, as long as you're willing to make the effort, which I feel is what happened to me. I mean, I interviewed an author recently who had written a book about some sort of disability experience, and I feel like now we're like friends. We had such a great conversation. That's totally random, right? Like you just have to be open to things while also putting in that effort. So yeah, but the internet is amazing. I mean, without that, it would be so much harder for any of this to be happening.
I would add, this is Jenny, I would add just two quick practical things. All of the organizations that I'm a part of, people think that they're like hard to get into, that they're somehow exclusive. And in every context, I say, just come back a second time. So I think part of what it means to be building that community is very simply like, come back. If you like it the first time, come back another time and build that. Because the only way the only way disability, one of the only ways or one of the best ways to build disability justice is to build relationships with other people that you want to be in conversation or share space or listen to. Like I could listen to Ileana's poetry for a long time. I would be happy to come to things where I can hear that. So it is really knowing that there are other people out there and figuring out how you find them is one piece of it, but then the other piece of it is making a commitment to returning to that connection a second, third, fifth, 10th time. And also knowing that it's not always the same people who are going to come back on that 10th time. And so making a decision about what you need at that moment, but also knowing that this is how community is formed, by people coming back when they can, how they can, even if it's not the same version of yourself that came the first time, coming the 10th time, but you're going to be in that community. And so that's how we build it in a very practical way and can make an individual commitment to ourselves that when our body minds are able, we go, and when they're not, we don't. And that we try the next time or the time after that.
Yeah, it's so good. I think right now we have our hard stop is at 3:30, so I think we have time for one more question from the chat that is asking, what are the challenges of regarding educating the general public about long COVID and dispelling myths about that? So if any of you want to speak to that, that'd be fantastic.
This is Ileana. I could read some limericks about that. Perhaps, so I can end on a more humorous note. There once was a woman with COVID, but her bed was a little outmoded. So she took it outside and she bid it goodbye, and then the whole darn thing exploded. There once was a woman with COVID. It was long and her life was eroded. Her strength was all gone, from the body withdrawn, but inside, heart and spirit revolted. There once was a woman with COVID. Her bed with 10 pillows was loaded. When she wanted to write, she turned on the light. Justice, she thought, and she wrote it. There once was a woman with COVID. She sat by her hearth, so devoted. She made a big fire for the COVID deniers, and all the bad doctors were roasted. Poem.
I love those so much, Ilyana. You're inspiring me to pick up my pen and
Oh,
try
they're
my
so
hand.
great.
Yeah, I think roasting the doctors is that's the solution. Um, trying to think of a serious answer and following up that. I mean, it's really hard. Is the answer, especially because the CDC, like, is anyone left at the CDC? I don't know. 5 people, 2 people, and the NIH, same. Um, I was thinking about this a lot, less about the general public, but about healthcare workers, as I was mentioning. Like, I don't think, at least in the last year or two, I don't think I encountered any doctors who didn't know what it was. Not that they knew anything in like a useful way, but they at least like knew what I was talking about. So many staff and nurses had no idea. And to me, that said, like, okay, so the hospitals, clinics, whatever, are doing no education at all. Um, but if the CDC is not like disseminating any information aside from like major, um, this is the aphasia, major efforts from patient groups, which obviously we should all be working on to sort of try to force them to be more aware. It's really, really difficult. I think it's even harder with the general public. I realize this is not a very constructive or optimistic answer, but I don't really have any optimistic thoughts about this. Um, Except that like we all basically just have to do our bits, right, to try to make people understand who know us. Um, and then again collaborate on hopefully some wider projects. But I think a lot of what the difficulty is that people do not want to know. Like there, I know many highly educated people who read the news all the time who just don't want to have to think about this. And I certainly think if people had more easy access to things like masks and tests, that would be really helpful. I think pushing the idea of masking as something that you don't have to do all the time, but like you should really wear a mask when you go to the doctor's office or maybe the grocery store or in the subway if you live in New York or wherever, as opposed to, I think so many people have this sort of like, what am I supposed to mask every day for the rest of my life forever? Oh my God, I'm not going to do that. I'm throwing them all away now. And that's, I mean, I kind of wish everybody did wear a mask all the time, all everywhere, but that's clearly not going to happen. Um, but I think a lot of it just comes down to like conversations that you can have with people who are perhaps open to hearing things, which again is like doing like one tiny piece of sand after the other. But it's really challenging when the government is really hostile. I mean, even in New York, like they're trying to pass a mask ban. So yeah, I don't know if anyone else has a better idea. I'd love to hear it, but I think it's tough.
Um, this is Jenny. Well, I would encourage people to listen to any of these interviews that are here on the Listening for the Long Haul website, either in long form or in the excerpts, where you can listen to people talking about a theme. So you can hear 15 people on a theme. And I would encourage anyone living with chronic illness, long COVID associated conditions, disability, disabled people, to be your own historian and record your story in whatever form it comes in. You know, maybe it's in limerick. Maybe some of us are gifted enough to do it in limerick. Maybe some of us have to do it on a phone. Maybe some of us are better typers and will type it out, and not to edit yourself while you're doing it, but just to try and do it in whatever process you need. Whether it's looking at someone you care about and having them ask you questions and recording the answer, or whether it's being by yourself in a room and talking about it, whether it's, being alone at your computer to type, or in whatever form, prose or poetry, that you do it. And then, because I think that that act is one of the ways that we are going to leave the historical trace that we need for this. We are all living in pandemic times. We all have been living in pandemic times since before this thing called SARS-CoV-2. We have been living in syndemic times, the time where pandemics are running together simultaneously. So we all have that important narrative, data, however, whatever you want to call it, it's inside of us, and we can share it out with the world.
Thank you, Jenny. That was a beautiful and succinct way to formally wrap up this panel. I love ending on the note of us all being our own historians, all having ways and gifts and talents and strategies for how we can all, as disability justice activist Mia Mingus calls us to, leave evidence. Can happen in so many formats and ways. So we want Jackie and I want to thank everyone for your support and energy today. We felt it in the chat, the questions asked, and then just the number of folks who were here for the event or who are going to receive this asynchronously. I think it just, as we were planning, reminded us of how important these conversations are, these spaces are, to keep the momentum going, even in the midst of moves to erase, silence these stories and narratives. Like we're living in precarious times, but we hope wherever you were Zooming from, you felt connected, seen, and encouraged to move past isolation and towards community. There are some questions we couldn't get to, but we are working on a strategy to respond to them after this event, and getting you all the links that were shared in the first session and the second. But again, we want to thank Illinois Humanities and AAPD for sponsoring the event, and for everyone at UIC and Strategies for High Impact Long COVID Justice for supporting us, along with Pro Bono ASL and Innis Captioning for providing us access. Thank you guys so much. I am so filled with joy and gratitude, and I hope everyone can get some rest after this and stop rest pace. Thank you.